this guy is going there to teach the future bishops, and he's giving them this fucked up psychoanalysis like interpretation,
Exactly.
and those people are gonna just absorb that shit.
It's a panopticon. Have you ever heard of the panopticon?
No, dude, what is that?
All right. The panopticon is a design of an institutional building with an inbuilt system of control, originated by the English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham, okay? This is the panopticon. This is what the Vatican is. Right now, at least. Although it's physically impossible for the single guard to observe all the inmates' cells at once, the fact that the inmates cannot know when they are being watched motivates them to act as if they're all being watched at all times. They are effectively compelled to self regulation. The architecture consists of a rotunda with an inspection house at the center. From the center, the manager or staff are able to watch the inmates. Bentham conceived the basic plan as being equally applicable to hospitals, schools, sanatoriums, and asylums. He devoted most of his efforts to developing a design for a panopticon prison, so the term now usually refers to that.
These people
Uh.
are stupid, man.
Oh shit.
Do you
All
think
right.
they can? What do you
So
think it will take for them to return to like some type of intellectual rigor, where like
no, it
they
has to be a
drop
work of
off
God at this
psychoanalysis?
point. So
Yeah,
so here's your answer. Hey, it's precisely what you were looking for. It's John O'Malley S.J. looking at Vatican II with Pope Francis's eyes.
let's check this one out.
So this is 9 years ago. All right. So like this is 1 year after the election of Pope Francis. Okay. So you're getting the answer to your question. Is there a follow up? Yeah, dude. Literally, imagine, dude, looking at Vatican II with Pope Francis's eyes. This is crazy. Ignatian Center for Jesuit Education, Santa Clara.
This is crazy, man. This is such like a bastardization.
All right. No, this is 2 years after February 2015.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2015 Santa Clara Lecture. My name is Mick McCarthy, and I serve as Executive Director of the Ignatian Center for Jesuit Education here at Santa Clara. And today's Santa Clara Lecture really is a highlight of our this year's Bannon Institute, a year-long series of events, lectures, discussions, really around the theme of Ignatian leadership. Now, the
Ignatian leadership.
strange fact of a Jesuit pope gives us unprecedented lens for discussing this theme, Ignatian leadership. And today's speaker can certainly give us the long view. As an eminent historian, he has specialized on the religious culture of early modern Europe and has written widely on the history of the Society of Jesus. His best known work, The First Jesuits, received multiple awards and was translated into 10 languages. 13 languages. Every week, there's a new book comes out, whether an original one or one in new language. More recently, he's produced works on the relationship between Jesuits and the arts, Jesuits and the sciences, the Council of Trent, to name only a few topics. In 2008, Harvard University Press published another of our author's most important works entitled What Happened at Vatican II. 2 years later came A History of the Popes, and last fall he published another volume entitled The Jesuits, A History from Ignatius to Present. Currently a university professor in the theology department at Georgetown University, our speaker has held fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the American Council of Learned Societies, the American Philosophical Society, the Harvard University Center for Italian Renaissance Studies in Florence, and the American Academy in Rome. It is probably fair to say that our lecturer today is among the most distinguished Jesuit scholars really of our time. And today we have the honor of having him give.
Can you imagine? The Jesuits think he's the most like
That's
honored or
crazy. Yeah,
decorated like
like they think
Jesuit
he
author of our
is.
times.
They think like this is like the pinnacle. Like this is like the ceiling of like being a
Of contemporary
juggernaut.
yeah,
Like yeah, a contemporary dude.
theologian or some shit.
They're cooked, man.
They're
Like this is
cooked. So that's
They're
why when you
cooked.
ask me, like, what can be done, like, I don't know. You're fucking cooked.
We need like 50 Saint Thomas acquaintances to come out and like unfuck this.
The 2015 Santa Clara lecture, looking at Vatican II with Pope Francis's eyes, leadership and spirituality. So I would ask you all to please welcome our lecturer, Father John O'Malley of the Society of Jesus.
He's not wearing his fucking clericals. He's in a
Yeah.
fucking shirt and a tie, dude. Next to the Mary statue. Amazing.
I'm delighted to be here. I have an honorary degree from Santa Clara, and I'm very grateful for it and honored to have it, and also have a number of friends here in the Jesuit community and also in the wider Santa Clara community. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here. You finally brought out the sun this afternoon, so that was a big help. My title, as Mick said, Looking at Vatican II with Pope Francis' Eyes, Leadership and Spirituality. So the big picture here, the big news is Pope Francis, right? I mean, he is a personality. He's captured the imagination of all kinds of people. I mean, the fact that Fortune magazine had a long article on him last year about his management style, it was very positive about it, says everything. And the current issue of the New York Review of Books, which is hardly the most Catholic-friendly magazine that there is, on the cover is Pope Francis. And what is he saying? It's an article in there by Eamon Duffy, the eminent, well, Irish, but British historian who teaches at Cambridge University in the UK. So we remember his 8 million people in Manila when he was there, and the 3 million on the beach at Rio when he was there. The wag said in Rio he thought he saw something that he never expected to see in his whole life. One thing was a humble Argentinian, and the other was a devout Brazilian. So, at any rate, my own experience, and I'm sure it corresponds with yours, is so often people go up to me and say, Father, I'm not a Catholic, but I love your Pope, and I think he's doing a great job. So they love our Pope. I mean, they like it because of his kind of folksy way of speaking. He's honest, straightforward, but also he's doing a great job. So people recognize that he's a real leader, and a leader across the board, not just in religion, but sort of a social and political leader too, a person very much concerned with the good of all. Bold, savvy, honest, transparent, and free. What I'm going to do this afternoon is two parts. One part will be to talk about Vatican II, because I see Vatican II as sort of providing the basic program for what he's trying to do. The second part will be Pope Francis as a leader, and in that part I want to make a connection with the Jesuit tradition, the fact that he's a Jesuit. So leadership, you know, it's something that seems to be in you when you're born and honed by your family experience growing up and your experience as an adult. So I'm not trying to say that his leadership is 100% explained by the fact that he's a Jesuit. But I do want to insist, and I'm convinced of this, that the way he's going about it, there are real correlations with Jesuit spirituality. So that's the way this talk will go. What about Francis and Vatican II? So part one. What's remarkable about him, on one level, is that he's the first pope in 50 years not to have participated in the council. For me, looking at him, that's an advantage. I really feel that Pope Paul VI, John Paul II, and Pope Benedict, on some level, we're still fighting the battles of the council. Francis doesn't have that baggage. He was ordained just as the council was finishing. In a sense, he kind of got it in its pure form. Somehow or other, he managed to assimilate it and to appropriate it. It's often remarked that, when compared with his predecessor, he cites, quotes Vatican II rather infrequently. That's true. I think he doesn't do that because it's so much a part of him. It's the way he is. It's how he sees the church, and I'll try to explain that as I go along. So, how to understand Vatican II? Well,
That's so
it's an
cringe.
extremely well. Let me say one other thing about
He
him and
thinks
Vatican II.
Francis is based because he
Professor
doesn't
said,
like challenge
in
it. Instead,
2008, I
he
published
like
this book on Second
adopts
Vatican Council,
Vatican
got
II
invitations
into his
to
like
lecture on it,
being.
and was very happy to do that. But when I finish, I think I'm really talking about something dead in the water.
He's
It's an interesting
Jesus.
thing that happened, but it's gone. And then beginning in 2012, with the anniversaries of the council, more invitations and the same thing. I don't feel that way today. I don't feel that way at all. I think the council with Pope Francis is almost as alive as it was in 1965. But anyway, it's a complex and rich event. I mean, there's no simple formula for understanding it. It's trivialized by referring to now masses in the vernacular. That has little to do with it. So, but how are we going to look at it? And now, at the distance of 50 years, I think we're ready now to change our method, because the way we were looking at the council up until this time, by and large, was sort of document by document. The document on the liturgy said this, the document on the church said this, and so forth. That's very valuable, that's basic. Now, we can and should and must, according to me, step back and look at that corpus, the whole corpus, all those documents. Why? Because there's a coherence in the council, and there are certain themes, certain issues, certain principles that are based on the documents, but occur in document after document after document. So we used to talk about the spirit of the council. That's what the spirit of the council is. Certain orientations, certain principles, so certain themes. So I'll just talk about 5 that I think are crucial, and crucial for understanding what Pope Francis is doing. Those are, first of all, collegiality. Secondly, local church. Third, dialogue. Fourth, reconciliation with other religions. And 5, servant leader. So what I'll do, I'll talk about each of these and try to indicate how Francis is putting them into practice. So collegiality, what is that? That's the teaching that the bishops have a responsibility for the whole church as well as for their own diocese in union with the Roman pontiff. So it's a principle in the council, first enunciated for the relationship between the bishops and the Pope. If you go through the council documents, it's a theme, it's a principle that kind of descends to all levels in the church, of bishops with their priests and the priests with their people. So it's a real shift in the way Catholics tend to look at the way the church is, the way the church operates. So we would basically sort of say, how is the church? How is the church, according to Vatican II? How does the church do business, according to Vatican II? Collegiality? It's a participatory church. People of God, we're all in it. We all have a voice. We don't all have the same level of voice, but we all have a voice. How about Francis? Well, one of his first moves was to create that inner circle of 8, the 9 cardinals from around the world to consult. That's one level. It's maybe a modest step, but it's a very significant one, a very symbolic one for him. And then there's a whole issue on the event of the Synod, Part 1, Synod on the Family, Part 1, which we just had last October. What's so special about that? It's so different from the synods that preceded it after 1965. What was different about it? A questionnaire that was supposed to be distributed to all the laity. Didn't work all that well, but really a very symbolic gesture. Then in the synod itself, he exhorts them to speak freely, to honestly, to say their mind. That's what you do when you're collegial. You're not hiding people don't need to hide their viewpoint. And there was no prepared statement for it. Other synods, the bishops have come to Rome, and they found out that under the table, they were going to be told what they had said. Okay, so that's one principle, principle of collegiality. Then the issue of the local church. That's another issue at Vatican II that kind of cuts across the board different ways. Begins with the decree on the liturgy that the local churches have some say in how the liturgy is done on the local level. It's a big change from what went on before. And the council also very much encouraged the development of episcopal conferences and so forth. So another principle, very important, Francis himself now, how does he introduce himself? On March the 13th, 2013, Bishop of Rome. The local church. And just recently, last week I guess it was, he made another little sort of liturgical change, you might say. The archbishops, you know, get a pallium. It's a little ecclesiastical, little sort of almost a stole, woven from lamb's wool partly. And until last week, the archbishops came to Rome and were invested by the Pope. Last week he said, no, I'll bless the pallium, but the archbishops will be invested in their own
What are you
diocese.
watching?
It's an affair of the local church. So it's a very simple thing. Can't make a great deal of it, but it says a lot about his mindset, it seems to me. So, third principle, dialogue.
Right.
This was a word introduced into the council by Pope Paul VI himself. And he wrote an encyclical during the council, and in that which that word occurs again and again and again. The council took it up. So much so that it became almost the, can you hear me back there? Yeah. It became almost the
We're watching something, bro.
symbol of the council, and it was a character
just
of the
turned
council.
him down.
Dialogue this, dialogue that, dialogue the other thing.
Okay.
So it's open to abuse and so forth. But still, it's a church of dialogue, not monologue, a church of not just speaking, but listening. And how does Francis take this up? I think in a few weeks, or maybe next week, Rabbi Skorka's coming. while he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, as you know well, he carried on this ongoing dialogue with
Yo, I have a
the
question
chief
for the
rabbi of
Catholics.
Buenos Aires, Rabbi Abraham Skorka, and they talked about a wide variety of topics, uncensored, and this was later published. The translation was published into English. That is incredible. That is incredible in the history of the
How
Catholic
old was
Church
Aisha?
for a bishop or archbishop
I just turned
to
him
sit
down.
down
I'm not even listening to them.
for week after week or month after month and have an open, free-flowing discussion with a rabbi, well, put it in minimal terms, it never was done before. And it's absolutely earth-shaking. Moreover, he describes it as what is the purpose of dialogue? Well, it's not to, come to an agreement necessarily, or, I'll compromise a little bit if you compromise a little bit. It's not that at all. It's simply to get to understand the other person, to be able to sympathize with where that person is coming from. And that's the whole
Dude, that
purpose.
is
And that,
psychoanalysis
doing it
right there.
in the long run will have a good effect. So, again, he, as I say, it's the listening church and a dialogue church, and Francis is an excellent example of that. The fourth theme, reconciliation with other religions. Of course, reconciliation with other Christian bodies, but especially reconciliation with non-Christian religions. And this was hammered out in the document eventually called Nostra Aetate, In Our Times. And the
Wait,
the
go
shortest
back 10
document of the council,
seconds
and
or
it
15
dealt principally
seconds.
with much theme, reconciliation with other religions. Of course, reconciliation with other Christian bodies, but especially reconciliation with non-Christian religions. And this was hammered out in the document eventually called Nostra Aetate, In Our Times. And the it's the shortest document of the council, and it dealt principally with Muslims and Jews. Started out as a document on the Jews. Significant. He had a terrible difficulty getting through the council. So much so that at one point the commission that sponsored it thought they would withdraw it from the council agenda because they were afraid it would get such a low vote. Maybe passed, but just barely passed, and they knew the Pope would not approve it in that case. So what did this do? It's earth-shaking, I think. It gave the church a new mission. It was a mission to be an agent of reconciliation in the world. Well, that's the gospel, right? But if you look at church history and so forth, that's not always been sort of the concept of the mission of the church. I have to say that Pope John Paul II and then a little lower key, Pope Benedict, really took this seriously and promoted it. But Francis at another level altogether, as I just keep coming back to this interview or this dialogue with Rabbi Skorka, washing the feet of that Muslim woman. It's
Dude, this is so cringe.
really, again, another landmark so close to what he's trying to do, the reconciling church. No more crusades against the infidel, right? Then finally, servant leader. All through the council, this triad occurs: prophet, priest, king. And this triad, traditionally, at least since the 16th century, has been applied to the clergy. Prophet, the one who speaks on God's behalf. Priest, the one who prays for the people. And king, the one who governs. Well, Vatican II takes that triad and applies it to bishops, applies it to priests, and applies it to lay people. Of course, with a slightly different nuance in every level here. They do this at different levels in different ways. But the laity also, prophet, priest, and king. But what the council does is do a radical redefinition of king, namely servant. King means servant. That's a neat trick, but that's exactly what the council did. And sometimes goes unobserved, but again, it's a very important and radical move. And this is it goes back to the gospel, Jesus washing the feet of his disciples and so forth. It could not have been more evangelical. And this is now, how is the church? The church as the servant. The church is the one who goes out and helps them. It's always done that, but now we have it on a different level. How about Pope Francis? Well, that's certainly how he looks at his office, his duties. He has, as you know, a real contempt for princely trappings. His refusal to live in the apostolic palace was a very dramatic gesture, but also very symbolic of his gesture. We had at Georgetown, he graduated 2 years ago, a young student who, his name was Luca Gianni, and he had an interesting passport. His passport was from Vatican City. His father is General Johnny, who is the head of security in Vatican City. So I met General Johnny. I hope that he remembers that. And Luca was a wonderful young man. At any rate, the story goes that when Pope Francis was about to take possession of his cathedral, Cathedral John Lateran, it was a procession from St. Peter's over to John Lateran, he went up to General Johnny and said, "Can I ride with you?" And Johnny supposedly replied, "Sure, if you want to drive too." So anyway, these are small gestures, but they mean a lot. And when he was made cardinal, it's a really wonderful quotation from him that has really touched me deeply, and it's very simple, very short.
The amount of
He
glazing,
said,
dude.
every ascent implies a descent. You must go down if you want to serve better. I think that hits him off. So, at any rate, how to put all this together? As I say, basically with Vatican II, now we're looking at how the church, the kind of how does it do business? How this touches us all. How do we, as Christians, behave? As Catholics behave? And how do bishops behave? How do priests behave? How does the Pope behave? So, participatory church, listening church, reconciling church, serving church. One of the great heroes of Pope Francis is Pope John the 23rd. Matter of fact, he has supposedly said that had he been elected in 2005, when Pope Benedict was elected, and you know he was the next candidate, the runner-up, had he been elected, he said he would have taken the name John in honor of Il Papa Buono, the good Pope, Pope John. So how did John describe to the Council Fathers what he hoped the Council to do in its deliberations? And he basically said the Council was to show the Church to be the loving mother of all, benign, patient, full of mercy and goodness. And I think that's what kind of sums all this up. I think that's what Pope Francis is aiming to. So now let's move to part two. How's he doing as a leader? How does he act as a leader? What are the qualities of leadership? And I have three qualities of leadership here that there are many more. As I said when I began, leadership is a kind of a miracle. And it happens to some people, it doesn't happen to others. But we can analyze it and get some characteristics that maybe help us understand it. One characteristic of a good leader is the good leader chooses the right people to be around him and to around her and to give advice. And we recognize it instinctively with any executive we know, any university.
Keep that in mind. A good leader
Yeah.
chooses the right people. So we're going to go through and take a look at those people that he has chosen to surround himself in the past 11 years.
President and President of the United States.
We're going to do that at some point.
Who does he listen to? Whom does he talk to? Does he talk to the right kind of people? So that's, I think, the first quality. And to do that, you have to have a good dose of humility. You have to be able to say, I am not omniscient. I need help. I don't know. I have to go to people and ask them to help me. I must say that as a scholar, I have to practice that. I mean, I'm writing something. I always getting into areas that I don't really understand, don't really know. I have to call up friends and say, please help me, and so forth. So that's a quality of a leader. And Francis, again, the first thing he does is that G9 or G8, G9, gather those cardinals around him. The synod itself is a way of getting advice, kind of in a public way. And then his scorca, just being the scorca, he has to say, I don't know, this is where I stand, you know, I'm listening to you, so forth. So choose the best people to help you. Point one. Point two. A real leader has to have inner freedom. Not look over his or her shoulder before making decisions. Need a great level of self-possession and able and willing to make moves that challenge convention. Not be afraid of criticism. These are all the marks of a leader. I must say that, you know, I was often asked when the long pontificate and the long illness of Pope John Paul II, shouldn't the Pope resign? And I said, well, you know, theoretically that looks okay, but I said, my fear would be that with a Pope still living, the new Pope would always be looking over his shoulder, would not want to do anything that might seem to be an implicit criticism of his predecessor still living. Doesn't bother Francis. Once again, my predictions were absolutely wrong. So he's not like that at all. So he's very much, his very manner of speaking, spontaneous, unrehearsed, break the mold. That line that's so often quoted on his trip back from Rio when he was asked on the plane about gay people and so forth. Who am I to judge? Well, you're the Pope. That's what popes do. No, he's his own person. He breaks that mold. He's got this sort of inner freedom. Then thirdly,
Inner freedom.
a leader has to have vision
That's how he describes it,
and
dude.
boldness in implementing it. He's got to be able to move the agenda, move the institution, or move this, whatever it is, along. So what about Francis? He's shown that from the very beginning. The very way he's tackled this problem of the Vatican Bank. We don't have the solution yet, but we do know that he has called upon the best people he can get around the world, and is determined to do something about it. And he has good people to help him do that.
He still hasn't
very
done
way of the
anything
Synod
about it.
again. It's boldly
10 years later, still nothing.
reimagining what the Synod is and what the Synod can do. And it's not a know-it-all papacy. So those are
It is
three
a
qualities
know-it-all
of
papacy.
leadership that I think are important. Now I'd like to make a correlation of that with the Jesuit tradition and Jesuit spirituality and the experience that Francis had as a Jesuit. So the first correlation would be with, where am I here? Okay, breaking the mold, humility, choosing the right people. Here we go to the first week of the spiritual exercises, and before that, we just go to the history of the Jesuit order. What about Ignatius of Loyola? I think one of the striking characteristics of Ignatius in his leadership of the Society of Jesus was his choosing two people to be his closest collaborators because he knew they complemented his gifts and made up for certain lacks of gifts. So one of these was his brilliant executive secretary, Juan de Polanco. And in Ignatius's writings, when he was general, it's really difficult to sort out where Ignatius begins or ends and where Polanco begins, even a document like the Jesuit constitutions. Ignatius was able to let this better educated man, and in many ways, in terms of practical issues, more gifted man, guide him and collaborate with him and say, I don't know, I need your help. And the same thing with his second great assistant, this man, Geronimo Nadal, whom Ignatius gave a really plenipotentiary powers to, carte blanche, to go out in all Europe, visit the Jesuit houses, and tell them what it meant to be a Jesuit. The result was that by the time Ignatius died, Nadal knew the Society of Jesus better than Ignatius did. He had hands-on, and he was also a brilliant man and knew what he was talking about. So again, Ignatius, that's fine. So this is a good example of the humility and this ability and this willingness to choose people better, more qualified than oneself. But let's move to the spiritual exercises. So the first week of the exercises is reflection about oneself and about one's previous life. And if you do it correctly, what you see is you've been messing up. You've been often chasing down the wrong paths. You've been, just not have your act together. So what the first week does is make you aware of your weaknesses and of your chasing down the wrong paths and so forth. And the result is we need guidance. I need guidance. I'm a weak person. I can't always trust my own judgment. I need that humility. Then there's another, so that's a piece of Jesuit spirituality. Another piece that's often not much attention is paid to. In 1974-75, the Jesuits held their 32nd General Congregation. It was an extremely important meeting. A General Congregation is the highest authority in the Society of Jesus. And it was held during the generalship of Pedro Arrupe. And in one level, it was kind of a referendum on Arrupe's leadership. And it got into the whole issue of faith and justice came up, which is a very divisive issue, and so forth. At any rate, the second decree of that congregation begins. It's about what is a Jesuit. It begins, what is a Jesuit? A Jesuit is a sinner, redeemed by Christ. Bergoglio, like myself, was at that congregation. I can't help but think that this made an impression on him. I mean, it was one of those decrees that everybody said, yes, this is right, this should go. So that's another thing. Then the experience he had at GC13, and as I say, I was there myself, and this was a very difficult meeting. It went on for 3.5 months. And those of you who are faculty members, so just imagine you had a faculty meeting that went on for 3.5 months, 5.5 days a week, with the agenda being the greater glory of God. So there was a lot of psychosomatic illness during that congregation. But when I came back to my province to report, I said, what was going on? I mean, let me say this. Those 3.5 months were one of the two most difficult periods in my life as a Jesuit. They were also the best my experience as a Jesuit. Anyway, when I came back, I reported the province, and what I said was, well, a Jesuit is a Jesuit is a Jesuit. We had all these differences, all this controversy and so forth. What we knew was everybody was trying to speak honestly for what they thought was best for the Society of Jesus and best for the church, best for the world. And what really struck me was how honest and straightforward people were. Well, Bergoglio was at that congregation, and that seems to me like, I think in the back of his head for the synod, he had a Jesuit congregation in mind. And the good thing about the congregation, 32nd General Congregation, was a lot of debate, a lot of passion. At the end, we were able to kind of pull it together. And I was asked today by a little meeting I had with some people on the faculty here. So where's the Holy Spirit in this whole thing? Well, I really feel that nobody knows where the Holy Spirit is, right? I mean, that's a mystery. That's beyond us. But if the Holy Spirit's anywhere, it's in honesty. If he's in honesty, she's in honesty. So this seems to me really an important sort of experience that Pope Francis had that I think has made a lot of difference. So at the end of the Synod, too, that address he gave was really interesting. He said, well, we had a lot of disagreements, and he said, that doesn't bother me. This is the way it should be, and I see, again, a correlation with the spiritual exercises, the rules for discernment of spirits, so that we had consolations and desolations. And that's just a sign that the Spirit's at work, and that we're talking honestly, and we're trying to listen honestly. So, at any rate, correlation number one, humility and Jesuit spirituality. Correlation number two, inner freedom. Well, that's basically what the spiritual exercises are trying to accomplish. So I think we need to realize that Pope Francis not only was a Jesuit for many, many years, he was also master of novices. So he made the spiritual exercises in the full exercises, 30-day retreat twice in his life, and then was master of novices and led other people, led the novices of the Society of Jesus through it. So he knows that well. And he knows that inner freedom, to find out God's will and to be ready and willing and able to do it and leave things behind, to move ahead, to be your own person, that's one of the big fruits of the spiritual
He
exercise.
just keeps repeating himself. It's such a boring
Then
dog.
finally,
Yeah.
the third correlation with the Jesuit tradition.
He doesn't
So
have
the Jesuit
a
tradition
lot.
of spirituality, of course, is the Christian tradition.
Wait,
right?
Chuck, what are the
So,
future
but
chapters of
metaphysics
this?
and emphases. And this third one with the boldness and courage.
Inner freedom, rules and
Again,
ordinances, general, great
A
soul
key meditation
conclusion,
in the spiritual
sexuality,
exercises
listening,
is
learning,
the
new game,
meditation on the kingdom of
theology,
Christ.
free and open debate,
And
final
it
report.
introduces the second week of the
Like-
exercises, the week that begins to kind of look at the life of Christ. the
He's a
public life of Christ.
teacher.
And at the end of this
I'm learning.
meditation,
Yeah,
Like,
this-
this is how it is with the Jesuits, man. I couldn't stand it, man. Like, it's just a whole bunch of
what am I going to do?
bloviating all the
So,
time,
Ignatius says,
self-aggrandizing,
those who want to give greater proof of their
Jesuit
love
this,
and
Jesuit
to distinguish
that. It's
themselves,
just like,
will offer
this
themselves
is not
entirely.
Catholicism.
So it's an
Humility,
a
good.
boldness,
And
a
we
full
should do that
press, if you might say.
stuff.
So I think that's
Right.
another
How
correlation
is
with
it that
spirituality.
they're able to
Now I
say
want to
so
conclude
much
with,
but say nothing?
Yep.
Yeah.
really an unusual
That's the
piece
Jesuits.
about
And then when they
boldness and
do
leadership.
say anything, it's just like
I mentioned already
glazing.
the Jesuit constitutions, and they were written by St. Ignatius along with his secretary, Juan de Polanco. The constitutions are an extraordinary document. There's nothing like them in the history of any other religious order. Other religious orders had their constitutions, but nothing like our constitutions, and indeed different from other constitutions. What's so special about them? One thing is their other constitutions of religious orders tend to be a collection of rules and ordinances. St. Teresa of Avila's constitutions begin with something like, we get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. The Jesuit constitutions have a beginning, middle, and end. They are divided into 10 parts, and there's a psychological, so they take the Jesuit sort of psychologically from the time he enters until he's a novice, then he's a scholastic, then he's a priest, then he's finally fully professed, and so forth. So there's that, then there's an underlying spirituality there too. This kind of correlation between the church and the world, or human culture and sacred culture. So that's there. At any rate, the ninth part of the Constitution, just before the ninth part, has to do with the general of the order. And one piece in that section, part of the Constitution, has the qualities needed in the general. So in one way, it's a portrait of the ideal general. You can broaden that and say it's also a portrait of the ideal Jesuit. The ideal Jesuit should have these qualities. So what are these qualities? Well, there's a list of them. There's a paragraph or two for each one. He needs to be a person of prayer, needs to be a person of solid virtue, needs to be a person who knows how to combine severity and mildness, and a few other things like that. These are wonderful, certainly basic, or the most basic part of that whole description. But then it goes on to speak about magnanimity, great soulness, if you will. And this is unique, again, in any document from a religious order. So that's one thing. The very fact that it's there, the very fact that that is considered a characteristic that the general should have. The second thing that's interesting is that this paragraph, this long paragraph, is, I'm going to read just part of it to you, is not a paraphrase of the New Testament. It's not a paraphrase of the Fathers of the Church. It's not a paraphrase of St. Thomas Aquinas. It's not a paraphrase of any papal document. What is it a paraphrase of? The Roman statesman and orator Cicero, a pagan. So in the Jesuit Constitution, there's a significant section that's kind of a slight
This guy's
modification
ridiculous.
of a statement from Cicero in his book, on duties, De Officiis. So I want to read
Gizmo,
it to
do you remember that
conclude that
one?
way. I find it very inspiring myself.
You remember that one? Where we
You
were
thought I
Who's
kind
was
doing
of,
kidding,
the
right? Do you guys think I was kidding about the Jesuits?
dude. This is who they are, man. They're serious. They're
They're
They're on some
who?
cooked.
bullshit.
It's
Yeah,
bullshit.
and this goes back to the earlier point. Remember, like when they were fucking introducing him, like he's like, this is like the pinnacle, the ceiling, the intellectual juggernaut, like of contemporary like Catholic
Pagan wisdom.
academics, and it's this shit. This guy is teaching other Jesuits, people that are training to do this.
And he's
This
teaching
is
other bishops, dude, how
yeah,
to become more
bishops.
like Pope Francis.
They're cooked, man.
Oh shit, dude. It's Jover, gentlemen. So again, I mean, I find it hilarious because I still have in the back of my mind you asking, so what can be done? And I'm like, you have no idea.
And I think this also helps us understand Pope Francis and his style of leadership and the kind of person he is. I think this description fits him pretty well. Magnanimity and fortitude of soul are likewise highly necessary for him because he must bear the weakness of many and must initiate great undertakings in the service of God our Lord. He must persevere in them with constancy, without losing courage in the face of contradictions, even though they may come from persons of high rank and power. He must not allow their entreaties or threats make him desist from what reason and the divine service require. He should rise above all eventualities, not allowing himself to be exalted by those that succeed or depressed by those that go badly, being altogether ready to suffer death itself if it is necessary for the good of the society in the service of Jesus Christ, our God and Lord. Thank you.
He could have began the whole thing with that right there.
Well,
Yeah.
But he
now the
just
ball's in your court.
meandered for like 30 minutes.
So
And
you want to
then...
take just a minute and say something to your neighbor. What struck you in this talk, if anything? What didn't strike you? Just take a second.
What didn't strike me?
Virgin, as a Protestant, how does this make you feel?
I think an angel's gonna throw him in the lake of fire.
You've been duped. You've all been duped.
Okay, it's all the time you get. So that was just to find the pump. So comments,
He
questions,
gives him 30
whatever.
seconds.
Please stand and so we can hear. Make sure we can hear you. A microphone. Okay, there's a microphone. All right. Yes, right there. Can't see it. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Should I stand up?
That's a lot of
You said that there
listening
were
in
5
30
keys to understanding
seconds.
Francis, and that the fourth one was reconciliation with other religions, and you even expanded that into how the church, new mission is to be an agent of reconciliation around the world. Do you think that that also extends to, say, for example, the LGBT? I mean, right now there's a lot of it's a very hot button topic, and because you're saying that their new mission now is to be, a reconciliation, I mean, like to be a mediator between these different religions, does that also extend to things like that, like when it comes to sexuality?
Very good question. First of all, the council did not deal with this, so this is beyond the council, right? But one way I look at the Second Vatican Council, as I say, it's a very complex and rich event, and there's no simple formula that explains it. But reconciliation is one word, one idea, one concept that I think does capture a lot of things. Reconciliation with other cultures, reconciliation with religious pluralism, reconciliation with the new social and economic situations, reconciliation with this whole problem of historical consciousness and so forth. So you can, under that category. So I think myself that this mode of listening and learning extends to, yes, I never get those letters right. What is it, LG? Yeah, whatever.
You hear
So
this guy?
I think it
Whatever.
does extend there. I think it extends to all
You
levels.
hear this
This does
guy?
not mean, as I try to,
The
I mean,
homos.
this does not mean that you are giving up your principles or what you think is the teaching of the church and the Christian tradition, but that you're willing to listen to the other person
Oh,
and find out what's going on.
spanky.
That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm a historian. And what I know is a lot of things that are now considered cast in stone and concrete were not always thus, and that this needs to be taken into account. So that's one of the things I say my own vocation as a historian, church historian, is to say, okay, it was not always thus. Maybe it's changed. Maybe it should have changed, maybe it shouldn't have changed. It's not always thus. So to take a look at this, this whole sexuality thing is, it's a new game. It's a brand new game. And
It's fun.
so the church needs to think about it.
New?
Okay?
Game.
I was being gay new.
I want to ask you, I know you're a historian, but I want you to make believe you're a physician for a moment. And I want to ask you about what your prognosis is for Francis's pontificate. We have a great deal, of course, enthusiasm for him and what he has been doing. But given that the relationship with the Curia, the Magisterium, and so forth, do you have a sense of, as a historian, given what you know, broadly defined, what your prognosis is, given some of the obstacles in front of him?
Okay, good. Because I'm a terrible prognosticator, right? So anything I say, don't believe. I mean, as I
Okay.
said in 2005, when John Paul II died, I was often asked who did I think the new pope would be, and I kept saying, well, it's an open field. I mean, nobody knows. I mean, there's only one thing that's certain: it will not be Cardinal Ratzinger. So, so that's how successful I am prognosticating. This is a real problem, and there's this back and forth. I mean, John the 23rd was a pope, and then he was kind of forgotten, and what he was trying to do was sort of forgotten. So it's very, very fragile. But somewhat depends on how long Francis is pope. One thing which is an interesting fact is that both years, he's been pope now 2 years, each year he's had a consistory and has nominated new cardinals. That is very unusual to do that frequently. And now if the conclave were held 2 months from now, he already would have appointed 25% of the voting members. So I don't want to say he's packing the cardinal college, but I'll just leave it at that. So that's what that was like. I mean, who knows? I mean, what I know about history is it takes unexpected turn. Whoever thought Pope Francis would be elected? Somebody like Francis. I mean, I certainly didn't think that anything like that would happen. So that's about all I can say. Yeah.
Wait, how can he say that when he said that he acknowledged that Francis was like on the ballot, or he was one of like the leading candidates during the conclave where Benedict won, and that like he literally just told us that Francis said that he would have chosen the name John the 24th if he
Yeah.
had won that election. And then he comes around and says, "Who could have guessed that he was, Francis was going to win this time?" It's like, what?
Yeah.
I'm not getting up. I want to talk a little about theology. In the past, theologians who ran into conflict with church teaching were they either got a censure like Beth Johnson or Anthony DeMello, or they were silenced like Hans Kung and Charles Curran. In the spirit that you mentioned of dialogue and reconciliation, how do you think that Francis is going to deal with, say, a Catholic theologian who might write a paper or publish a book that someone would have a tiff with?
Okay, I'm going to predict again, right? I mean, all the evidence we have, it's going to be a different game. Now, he has left in place Cardinal Mueller in the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And Mueller is a hardliner and makes no bones about it. And I think that, again, how to explain this, I think it's because Francis does not want to, he wants to be not just kind of listen to one side of things. So I think he left him anyway.
So he talks about Cardinal Mueller, and he says, "Oh, well, I guess he's left this hardliner in because Francis wants to listen to both sides." You know what he did immediately after this talk in 2015?
What happened?
He got rid of Mueller.
That's crazy.
He just recently been appointed by his predecessor, so I think it would have been a very bad political move. But I think that different principles are at work here. But he's made a couple remarks about, well, don't pay too much attention to the CDF. Well, it's easier for him to say than for us on the receiving end. So it's, again, he's not so concerned about those issues, for one thing. He's much, I mean, it depends what the issues are, but he's much more concerned about the bigger issues of the church in the world, how the church does business. So I don't know. I mean, but I like to think a brighter day is dawning.
He's not saying anything, right? He's just making shit up.
Yeah.
In terms of the Synod Part 1 and Part 2, While open and frank discussion are clearly evident, the question of how that gets resolved is not so evident. The Anglican Communion has been very unsuccessful in preserving communion around some of these same issues. And I'm wondering if that experience at the General Convocation of the Jesuits offers Francis any guidance in how to hold things together when it doesn't look like people are going to come to an agreement.
Yeah, very good question, and you point to the weakness in this whole, free, open debate. One difference between
Yeah.
the Synod and the Jesuit congregations is the Jesuits came with a sort of a whole different background and sense of how to deal with these issues. It was just a new thing for the Synod, and I think it's dangerous. I'm glad it's happening. I think it's the way to go, but it's not going to be an easy road. I don't think we should think that.
Okay, this is
What's
boring.
the outcome of the Synod going to be? I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of disappointment when it's over. Again, I'm in my prognosticating mood tonight, but I suspect that the final report will not say a great deal sort of new and startling and so forth. A lot of people are going to be disappointed at that. That doesn't bother me, because what I think was important here was that now these issues are out there. They can be dealt with as time goes on, and the principle of honesty and clear and open debate and so forth has been established. So it's a dangerous game, and
Debate.
you make a very good point. But and another thing about, again, the Anglican Communion has this problem too, but it's in spades in Catholicism. I mean, all these different cultures that the Church has to reckon with. I mean, in the North Atlantic and even the South American world, the polygamy is
It's
not,
fucking crazy.
in principle, not acceptable, right? Whereas in Africa it is. And all the thing about gay and lesbians in the North Atlantic world, even the Latin America and so forth, that's kind of entered a whole new phase. It certainly has
Why
in
in
most parts of
America?
Africa and so forth. So it's
In
holding
America.
this thing together.
Latin
Well,
America, you
that's the Pope's
said.
job. That's the Pope's job. And the good thing about Catholicism is we do have somebody for whom that has that job. The Anglicans don't quite have that. Not going to solve all the problems, but it's a good issue. Way back.
I was wondering if you could touch upon.
And there's
things that
more
Francis may have
than
done poorly so far,
2
or maybe issues
videos
that he
of
needs to
this
pay attention
guy.
to, sort of going
Oh, wait,
forward in the
wait,
future.
wait, hold on.
Oh, you're touching my
What
hero.
was
I
this?
mean,
Look, go back a piece with 10
let me
seconds.
see. That's not in my script. Good issue. Way back.
I was wondering if you could touch upon some things that Francis may have done poorly so far, or maybe some issues that he needs to pay attention to, sort of going forward in the future.
Oh, you're touching my hero. I mean, let me see. That's not in my script. Well, yeah, one thing I don't know the ins and outs of it, but that I sort of winced at was his address to the Curia before Christmas. It seemed to me he just kind of listed all these ways that all these sins that people in the Curia could commit. And these are sort of scolding, actually, I mean, in an indirect way. And my own experience is that generally does no good. Everybody, I think of my parents when the pastor
Dude,
would get on his high horse and rant and rave about all the,
Bismo,
all
whenever,
this stuff, all the bad things were going.
if it's almost like his one criticism, like the example of like when Pope Francis was, bad, was like a moment of like little baseness that would come out of Francis. Like that is his critique, is like when he has those little moments when like the act of scolding, like, oh yeah, these are some like when that comes out, that's his like that's the problem. That's his criticism of him. When he goes back and like he is reminiscent of like a more traditional pope.
He's cook.
Whatever.
And this guy's teaching others how to be bishops. Bishops in training.
Going on, people had to straighten up and so forth. My parents would come home and they loved it. They'd say, he really told them. So I think in general with those things, those kind of generic criticism and so forth, yeah, that's really bad, but it's not me. And then also, first of all, politically, it's out there. I don't know what good that does. And what about his people? He has to rely on the Curia. So whether he likes it or not, that's the organs that make the thing run. So that'd be one thing I don't think done so well. I know others may disagree with me on that. I'd be happy to hear.
I have a question related to the last point you made, in that there is a Ciceronian paraphrase at the end of the Jesuit constitutions. And I take it your point is not just that there's this wonderful reflection on what leadership is coming from a secular source, but that a secular source has been used in the formulation of this religious community. And I take your point that that's really quite significant. And in your own work, you talk about that as being a significant element in Jesuit spirituality. Have you seen in the pontificate of Francis the same kind of reliance on, call it secular thinking, or any kind of an analogy like that? That there's an openness to a way of thinking that is that extends or stretches the normal religious framework within which popes generally speak?
Well, this is not quite on the point that you're making, but I think it's related to it. In that long interview that he had with Antonio Spadaro, the Jesuit, that long ongoing interview with this editor of the Civiltà Cattolica, the Jesuit journal in Rome. And so this was then communicated to the editors of all the editors of Jesuit magazines around the world. I mean, in the United States, America magazine, the editor was there, or involved in it, and so forth. So what struck me about, so it's kind of free-floating, all over the place interview. And one thing that really struck me was, certainly not the main point of the thing by any means, but one thing that really struck me was his cultural breadth. He knows literature. He taught literature as a Jesuit scholastic. He taught psychology. He knows music. He knows art. And he's not afraid to say this and talk about it. So it's not quite the thing you're talking about, but to me, it's a, I don't know, I like to think that there's some kind of integration there with him on this issue. So that's about the best I can do on that. Yeah, over there.
So he asked him specifically on the whole, like, Cicero, right? And how there's
Yeah.
this, quote-unquote secular source at the heart of Jesuit spirituality, or in the constitutions. And
Yeah.
how that applies. Does this mean that Pope Francis is working by any other secular principle that he knows of or whatever? And he just, like, he doesn't give an answer.
Yeah, he has like
With
a little
respect to
seizure, and he
effects,
talks
going back
about
to our
like his background in psychology and his breadth of culture and whatever, and he likes that,
He
he
likes
likes that.
art, and he likes
Yeah, his answer was literally Elvis and Picasso.
Elvis and Picasso.
Like, great.
The giggler.
Some have said that his freewheeling speech is a kind of defect. You mentioned earlier that he made that comment with regard to homosexuality about who's to judge. And then when someone asked him, well, does this mean you're going to change? I forget the exact remark. He said, look, I'm a son of the church, and didn't go any farther. Well, you've got those two edges. Who's the judge? I'm a son of the church. Is there some reflection you can get out of those two comments?
Not at this moment. Again, it's charming. His free-floating style is very charming and refreshing. But again, he's quoted. I mean, it goes right into the internet and so forth around the world instantaneously. So, those two things, I'm the son of the church and who am I to judge? I don't see those as necessarily incompatible, because again, I think he's ready for some kind of process. And he has his theological limitations too. So I don't know what to say beyond that. I don't know what more to say. Are there any Catholics in there? Okay,
Yeah, there's
I think we have heard from
one more.
Yeah.
Okay. It seems to me that when people talk about Pope Francis, there's this reverence for him and the way that he is showing us a new way of having mercy, and also this hope.
Oh, we're watching
that
something. Give us like a
that he'll
minute.
somehow answer the longing we have in our souls for something, something we want from the church. And I feel like I see this in things that I'm reading and hearing, and in this room, there's this sense of, he said this. Could it mean this? could he be ready and willing to help answer this longing? And I'm just wondering, to what degree does a pope do that? Can they listen to the spirit of the people and the desire for acceptance and change based on that, as opposed to something else?
Well, the loving mother of all, benign, patient, full of mercy and goodness, answer all our questions and so forth. He's not going to answer all our questions, nor should he. But to present the church in a way that does touch our deepest yearnings for love and care from the church. That I think a pope can do. He's doing that. I think. Again, the danger is to raise all these false expectations. These expectations which will never be met. Every year we start all over again with ourselves and with other people. So it's a never-ending process. But what do you expect from the church? What is the gospel? For me, the gospel is simply the message that God loves each and every one of us unconditionally, and seems to me he's communicating that. And if that or something like that is communicated, that touches us, that gets us, that leads us, that helps us. So that's all I can say.
Let us take a moment to thank Father O'Malley.
All right.
This guy's fucking crazy, dude.
He's nuts, right? So to answer your question, what can be done?
It's just so unrefined. It's like every almost every question he was asked, he was somehow saying a lot of words but not saying anything. Like there was like an art form to it, to never giving like a really straight answer that seemed relevant. Like there wasn't um I don't know, man. Like it if you could have an hour, to talk to someone like Thomas Aquinas, or maybe like a Protestant like William Lane Craig, like someone like that is, they have like this engineering metaphysical mindset of sorts. Like you could get a lot out of that 1 hour, and like it's gonna be very succinct. It's gonna be very critical. Like everything is gonna make like there's gonna be like every sentence is going to build upon the one that came after it, and ultimately there's going to be like a sound conclusion, a reasonable conclusion at the end of it, that you can take something of use out of this dude was just so wishy-washy and so fucking vague and ambiguous, and like he was just saying nothing. He was just glazing him the whole time. And whatever he did say, like it was just talking about how like that they're kind of eroding like the sort of like the parameters, and like that this is like a good thing.
I'm trying to look for this video right now. One sec. But yeah, dude, like he's kind of like lost the plot. I don't know. Like it's kind of like what you noticed. Like part of like your feedback was, it doesn't seem like he's really coming from like a place of having an actual philosophical or theological foundation to be able to explain or address any one point theologically, right? He's
Yeah,
just like in this interpretive mode, right?
yeah,
From what he experienced from the council. And quite frequently, some of the criticisms you're going to hear from quote unquote more conservative people is that the spirit of Vatican II, right, is not a real thing. And people keep trying to interpret things within the spirit of Vatican II, right? It's always this ambiguous, non clear, weaponizing of the ambiguity itself against people who don't like the way that they're interpreting Vatican
And
II.
that's a good thing. It's
That's a
progressive.
good thing.
at Beesmo one time, this is gonna sound unrelated, but it's gonna relate to it. There was this one dude that I was talking to about the future of political strata, and how he envisioned a future where like there's gonna be states on top of states. It's like, let's say you live within the United States, and like uh instead of just automatically identifying with like the de facto state of the United States, you could instead, like, maybe while you're living in the US, you could adopt and enter another state that's within it. So like uh I don't know, like maybe like some type of anarcho like community, well, that, so like even though you're in the United States, you can, I don't know, go live in a commune or some shit, right? Something to this effect. And ultimately I thought it was kind of like untenable, like this is retarded and it doesn't make like that much sense. But um when it comes to it's like the homo heretical institution, like people like this, like that you could go back to the spirit of like what it means to be a Catholic, the original like institute, like the way that that worked, and just kind of just ignore the like people like this guy. Like that seems like, do you think that's like a possible thing you could do, or like that people could do? Is basically just ignore people like this and kind of get back to like the pre-Vatican II days.
Well, that's precisely what you're going to get criticized on. That's what they're trying to institutionalize and restructure right now. They want to reform, and that's what this whole synod on synodality is about. They want to try to reform it in a way where you can't go back and interpret even the prior church before Vatican II without including Vatican II. Like, there's an interesting thing that that he said earlier. I don't know. I can't remember if it was in this video at the earlier or before, where I think it was in the prior video where he's talking about what Vatican II was trying to do was to try to get away from the scholastic way of talking about theological matters and try to return to a more pastoral approach, which can be found in the church fathers, right?
This is
So,
ridiculous. Yeah.
my prima facie answer to you would be, yeah, there is a way we can go back to what the church fathers said. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but he's already taking that space up by saying, "Oh no, no, if you want to go back to the way the father's saying, that's precisely Vatican II." Now do you see?
Yeah.
So, identifying their psychoanalytical mode of narrating and interpreting the council itself is really important for trying to delineate what they could say about the early church fathers and their teachings.
Yeah.
Because clearly, when you look at the old church fathers, a lot of what the church fathers taught were neither accepted by the church, and also clearly it doesn't comport with Vatican II. Like, there's a lot of misogynistic, anti-Semitic opinions that some of the church fathers had. Now, clearly, they didn't have consensus on those issues, but many of the church fathers that we look for orthodoxy and whose propositions were accepted, a lot of them also had propositions that weren't accepted, right? So you could try to hold, quote unquote, these Vatican IIites accountable to what the church fathers were actually saying when we're talking about like pastoral applications of this or that from the Vatican II. So, but again, unless you're aware of those, you're not going to be able to have that dialogue. So that's why, like, to me, like, in as much as, for obvious reason, Eastern Orthodox have issues with Catholicism, right? And it all has to do with the papacy. And I hate it when the conversation eventually does degenerate into that, because usually that's the first place that an Eastern Orthodox is going to go in the conversation when you want to talk about the things that they know, which is literally the Church Fathers. But I appreciate the Eastern Orthodox nonetheless, because when you do talk to them, they're pretty well versed in the teachings of the Fathers. I think so. To answer your first question, like prima facie, yeah, is there a source that we can get to, right? That's prior to the church that could be more substantial than what the Jesuits are talking about? And yeah, that's literally the church fathers. I think it's important even for scholastic studies like the writings of St. Thomas or any scholastic theological like explanation or elaboration that happens after the scholastic period. Everybody should be well versed in what the church fathers said. And that's pretty much, the Jesuits are right. That is kind of like the crux of Vatican II. Like, it literally says we need to incorporate the early church fathers more. And I think that that was more programmatic towards the ecumenical efforts that Vatican I wanted to achieve with the Eastern Orthodox in particular when it comes to ecumenism. Um, but I mean, that to assume that St. Thomas or scholasticism didn't include the thinking and thoughts of the church fathers, that's also a false dichotomy. St. Thomas is well known for creating his own commentary on the scriptures, on the New Testament, with the writings of the church fathers or what was available to him at the time. So that's the short and dirty answer of it, I guess.
Yeah.